So in this last class, I think that it's important when we talk about humanism and anthropology's place is to talk about conflict and why conflict exists. Really, when we look at global conflicts, this is a 2014 view of what you know how many people are kind of been displaced by conflict. Um, and just to point out one number, look at Colombia in 2014. It's 5,700,000 people displaced. That's a huge number of people. And then in Nigeria, you have 3.3 million. So massive amounts of people being displaced by these conflicts. But really, in terms of an anthropological kind of analysis around conflict, we look at just a general lack of understanding of other cultures and languages and communication issues. In terms of we've talked a lot about some people not even having the same terms for colors. So how do we bridge those kind of communication gaps? I personally think that anthropology is kind of in a perfect position for that. And really, a lot of it comes down to ethnocentrism, right? This idea that somehow the culture that you're viewing or analyzing or judging in the end should be behaving the way that you do, based on your own kind of biases, right? Also, there's this perceived lifeboat mentality of the planet, that only so many people and so many certain people should be existing on the planet and other people shouldn't be here. This is a major issue, and leads to all kinds of ethnocide and genocide and all these other things. Power and change obviously are huge components of this. The neoliberal kind of power structure of corporatist, multi kind of multilateral corporations, and the idea that profit is more important than well-being of humans. Definitely gets into this power and kind of change process. Wars and genocide obviously are coming out of kind of this ethnocentric lack of understanding and whatnot. And then what are some of the other reasons for these conflicts? Why do they exist? Or is it always cultural? Is it economic? Is it still this idea that we've got this alpha idea, and the United States is the alpha currently? There for a while, it was like the USSR and America fighting to be the alpha. And so fascinating kind of structures, right? And we know that in human history, we haven't always had this alpha concept. So really weird in this kind of global age and how much conflict it actually causes. Culture wars and preservation. Culture war as a definition is the idea that two different cultures, maybe even subcultures, are at odds. This is related to a version of racism. So culture wars is something that politicians used to talk a lot about, in terms of teaming up. The term, I don't know, I think that it's misused a lot, but perceived threats of a loss of culture and or change. This gets into kind of the ideas around immigration as well, like this idea that somehow if new people move in, then your culture is going to change. And again, if you paid attention in class, you realize that change is going to happen no matter what. It doesn't matter if somebody moves in and brings kind of different ideas. Eventually, your culture is not going to look the same that it did when your great grandma was here. That's just the reality of the way things are, right? Especially in a developed nation where these things happen quicker. And I would say that that's kind of one aspect, right? Change happened with Native American and indigenous groups around the world for 250,000 years, but the change, the cultural change due to technology, movement, and some of these other things is happening very rapidly. Culture preservation can be good as long as it remains culturally relative, and preservation does not turn into forced acculturation or cultural imperialism. So this gets into some of Foucault's kind of identity stuff in terms of power. Like, your cultural identity is important, but when you start to think that your cultural identity is more important than somebody else's, that's when we can start to get into this power over structure, right? So this is the final kind of slide, and this is also on the discussion board for you guys to participate with. And I'm going to leave this kind of with you. If as an anthropologist, you're not supposed to judge other cultures, and you're completely aware of personality and enculturation, then you cannot judge others at all, even others of your own culture, because we also, being enculturated and influenced, are not immune from culture. And if culture as an entity is protected from judgment, then those individuals making up those cultures should also be without judgment. Therefore, if we're part of a culture, then we too must not be judged. Do we have cultural norms we must follow? So this is the interesting kind of dynamic, right? Is that if we're not judging individuals, for pulling out in front of us or those kinds of things and calling them stupid rather than them being in a hurry, um, that's probably fine. But in terms of them, breaking laws, harming other people, that's against cultural norms and taboos. So yes, there is a place for this. However, these norms are ever changing, right? So our rules and laws change all the time too. So my big question here is for you guys is where does this leave us, right? Um, and one of the pieces is think kind of a hint is it leaves us with participant observation. So I think that being part of this dialectic in this conversation, being informed by anthropology theory and occupying that space is helpful when navigating human dilemmas and human problems and the global age, right? These are all very, very important kind of concepts around what anthropology can actually provide us. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. You guys have plenty to do because you've got a paper to turn in at the end of the week. Um, Again, I've really enjoyed the class. You guys are all great students. Thank you for participating, and I look forward to having you in class again. All right.